You are watching this video on YouTube and you're probably using a browser. It's easy to take for granted this tool we use in our day-to-day lives, but it was shaped by a massive technological melee that happened back in the 90s called the browser wars, where this was the main tool to access the internet instead of being a proxy for just downloading these. At the turn of the millennium, most people used Internet Explorer to access the internet. It was so prevalent that using anything else would have been really unusual. When you're trying to be the best, reaching a goal is only half the battle, because holding on to it, that's a different challenge entirely. Let's talk about why IE died. Let's start the story in 1994. This was the year Netscape was released. It was one of the first modern looking browsers where other companies battled for control over the PC market with enhancements to operating systems or hardware. They found their niche, and instead of getting involved in a ground war between the likes of Apple and Microsoft, they focused on being the bridge leading out of the machine and onto the internet. Remember, this was a simpler time where browsers were not paid for by the contents of your soul as you type your thoughts into a search engine, but rather a concept known as money. Netscape wanted you to pay for the privilege of surfing the web no matter what computer or operating system you started from. I saw an interview from '97 where Bill Gates starts talking about how he thinks the internet will be used in the future. He describes how we use cloud computing today. Now, if he's talking about this publicly in '97, Microsoft probably realised how important the internet would become before that. So imagine if you spent years perfecting what would be the main tool for people to access the oceans of possibilities, from connecting the minds of people all over the world, only to have someone embed themselves in a little nook in your plan and pretty much control the most valuable resource imaginable. Wars have been fought for less. By '95, Netscape was the most popular browser on the internet, beating its main rival at the time, Mosaic. This was the year Microsoft released Windows 95, which would arguably go on to be one of the most important operating systems ever. And I say this because with the growth of the PC market over the next few years, it would make up a large part of what people thought a home computer was. And although not their main focus, they weren't just going to ignore this gaping hole in their system, so they plugged it with Internet Explorer. The year after, they bundled it as a free application in Windows, like all these other programs you usually get. It only took 2 years for it to assert itself to being the dominant contender for internet access. After seeing 3 years of decline, Netscape open sourced some of its code to the Mozilla project, and a couple of months later were bought by AOL. By 2001, Internet Explorer had a record of over 80% of the market share, and I think some of the facts that led to this were the following. First, it was probably a better browser. As Netscape evolved, it started to suffer from bloat and feature creep. What I mean by this is, when applications that have a clear purpose start to do really well and become profitable, they almost suffer from their own success. Different people who have their own ideas about how to grow the business want to do different things. The product management have to add extra features to make it cover more areas. Then the more code you add, the more complex it becomes. Bugs become more prominent, testing takes longer, and it becomes difficult to maintain. It's a common problem with any successful software, and it's a balancing act that can make or break a growing business. If you don't grow and adapt, you become outdated, but if you grow in the wrong way, it can be even worse. When Microsoft bundled Internet Explorer with Windows, it made it easier for people to get. While Netscape was charging for its service, Microsoft would eventually offer IE for free. The mid-90s would continue to see PC sales rise every year, and Windows was the main operating system being used. The world wasn't as computer literate as it is today. The first time buyer would struggle to set up a printer, let alone trying to navigate around a modem, a phone line and a DNS setting. So just having one set of instructions to get one browser working on one operating system would have made this all a less daunting task. There's also taste. Again, you're looking at a fledgling market with low expectations. If you never used the internet before, how can you tell what's good or bad about a browser? If I showed you Quantum or Chrome, which one would you pick? It's pretty arbitrary. If you choose one, you'll get used to it, and then you won't want to change because you know where things are and you like how things look. Change can be disrupting, and sometimes the short-term inconvenience is enough to keep you from trying new things. It would take some time until people were familiar enough with what the internet had to offer. Then, with a little bit more confidence, they could start to experiment with different configurations until they found something that suited them. The Mozilla organization was founded in 2003 by the Mozilla Project. It was a non-profit set up to promote open source software. They were initially funded by the likes of community donations and even companies like AOL, who had previously bought Netscape a few years ago. In 2004, Firefox was released. With the backing of a global community, they raised over $50,000 of cash donations and advertised in the New York Times. Firefox gained momentum straight away and started to eat into IE's market share. Now the last 10 years saw a massive rise in home personal computing. Internet was really taking off and vast amounts of money were being spent by people and companies on their IT infrastructure. By this stage, people's expectations were a lot higher, and suddenly a bunch of respected people started talking about this great new browser. For a lot of people who were still getting used to home computing, it must have been quite a surprise to watch the internet rise from a blue and orange icon on your desktop. In 06, IE7 was released, but the Firefox team was young, hungry, and fueled by a worldwide community of people, and updated to version 2 of that year. It took 5 years between releases of IE, while Firefox had updated in only 2. This trend continued until 2009, and that's when Google threw their hat into the ring. Now whatever die-hard IE users didn't migrate to Firefox would travel on to Chrome. The next couple of years would see support for older versions of IE being pulled back. Now their attentions rest with Edge. So what have I learned about this story? Post 2002 is where things start to get gnarly. It's easy to say that the release of Firefox was the beginning of the end, but I think there was more to it than that. I think it's important to understand some things about the time period. Since 97, Microsoft was being accused by the US for using its power to impede competition. They eventually reached a settlement with the government, only to be followed by a suit from Netscape's new owner, AOL. Over this period of time, Microsoft would be defending itself from an onslaught of various lawsuits from different companies. There was also an issue of IE not following standards set by the W3. Now, standards are a set of guidelines or instructions on how a browser will interpret things like CSS and HTML. When you visit a web page, you open a connection to a computer that's connected to the internet called a server. The server sends you back the HTML for the website that you want. The HTML is then read by a browser and is interpreted to what you see. So imagine if you wanted to display some text in bold. You would write some HTML like this and wrap the words in a B tag. If one browser interprets B as make it blue, it might render it blue, while another might make it small. As you can imagine, it's very important to have consensus with how you interpret HTML, because building web pages would get way more difficult, and it kinda did. Developers would need to include instructions like this on their web pages so they could check what browser someone was using and do things different on each browser. Now this had a negative effect on time and resources because you have to maintain at least 2 distinct pieces of functionality. And as the website grows, you add more functionality, you consistently have to make compromises because you have to do everything twice. There was also a 5-year gap between Internet Explorer 6 and 7. This, coupled with some very public security issues, would hurt their reputation in the long term. I'd imagine this left a lot of business at the time very nervous. This was the period of the dot-com crash where essentially a bunch of internet companies just went to the wall. So if the main artery to the internet is looking like it hasn't seen a pair of runners in a while, it's not going to inspire a lot of confidence. Now I can only speculate on these things because I wasn't there, but I'm trying to imagine why this transpired and what actually makes and breaks a browser. I also wonder about the effects of the open source community. Now I think it's fair to say that this helped Firefox beat IE, which was a private browser controlled by a powerful company. But then why did it not work against Chrome, which like IE is a private browser controlled by a powerful company? Personally, I think a lot of the technical issues with browsers are only important to a fraction of the people using them. Your average person who just wants to listen to music, chat to people and deal with the daily monotony of life probably won't be concerned with all the technical dimensions until something goes wrong. Without going into too much depth here, if I was going to pick one aspect that I thought would make or break an application like this, I think it's usability. Once a program fulfills its main requirement, the next important point is to make it seamless. I think easy use played a large part in IE's dominance over Netscape, because most people wouldn't have been as technically astute, and having a browser that was easy to access that worked was convenient. And I think this convenience spills over into the Firefox versus Chrome debate. For instance, my experience when I load Chrome is I find Chrome much faster, therefore it's less hassle for me to use, because at the end of the day all my browser does is get me to a search engine fast. But the cost of this is memory. Chrome is a bigger beast. Its memory usage is quite high, so if you have a laptop that's slow, then Chrome might not be the best choice for you. Then there's also the issue of consistency. Humans are generally uncomfortable with change, especially if it's unexpected or unwanted. When it comes to graphical controls in a browser and you're used to a certain layout, a disruption to your experience can be really off-putting. Look at the difference between Chrome, Firefox and Internet Explorer here and ask yourself, which of these do you prefer and why? Personally, back in 2008, I didn't like the way Firefox looked because I was so used to IE's layout and Firefox looked a bit surreal. When IE7 happened and I upgraded, the visual difference between IE6 and 7 just kind of bugged me at the time. The familiarity I craved was ripped away like an old plaster and I was left to just deal with it. And if I didn't like this and I couldn't have that, well, why not try something else? Even though this change looking back was arguably slicker and better, even though I have a slight nostalgia for those big back and forward buttons, it was still enough to stick in a lever and wedge me out of my comfort zone to try something new. Anyways, these are just some of my thoughts. I feel like I'm leaving out so much stuff here, but I just wanted to stay on point. I think there's so much more to this story than I know, and if you were working on any of these projects back in the day, please let me know if I'm far off the mark with my assumptions. But looking back on how these applications lived and died is like looking at a new type of history. A history with maybe not blood, but certainly sweat and tears. And as the old saying goes, those who don't learn from history end up looking like right on Muppets. Thanks for watching. If you like it, share and subscribe. Good luck.